All right, so thank you everyone for joining today for our July's event. As a reminder, this event is brought to you by HIP, the Hungarian Young Professionals, an organization of young professionals and also those who feel young inside, to help network, help get to know each other and socialize with fellow young Hungarians in the US. We primarily operate on through the LinkedIn group. So if you have LinkedIn, please feel free to search for HIP or Hungarian Young Professionals on there to join us, where you can learn about future events and also just network and socialize. So tonight's event is themed around moving back to Hungary, and we have three awesome panelists here. We have Emese Tass-Aranyos, we have Tímea Nádas, and László Katona. All three who made the jump and moved back to Hungary. And it's a great opportunity to learn about the experiences, best practices, some things that were challenging, as well as other things that were easier than thought. And it's great to have all three of you here because from what I understand, we have three different scenarios of moving back to Hungary. So without further ado, I'll give the word to you guys and Emese. So the first thing, if you could just introduce yourself briefly, tell us some things about yourself, and then how and when and what reason did you move back to Hungary? Emese, if we can start with you.
Yes. So hi, my name is Emese. I was born in Chicago and I lived there until I was 14. So I moved back to Hungary with my family when my father took an early retirement package. So we were fulfilling his dream and coming back home. Interesting event that I was 14 when we moved back, and my father was 14 when he moved to the States. So that's an interesting connection. I've been living here for 18 years now. I don't know what else to say in the introduction.
Yes, the profession that you're currently in.
Profession. Well, I have a master's in translation, but I'm currently not working in that profession. So, but we can say translation, and my bachelor's degree is a degree in art history. And I also have some connections in tour guide and travel.
Awesome, thank you. Tímea?
So I go by Tímea. Most people call me Tímea. I moved to Hungary when I was actually right on my 18th birthday, so fresh out of high school. And I guess there's a lot of intentions. The original thought of my moving there stemmed from my father moving back to Hungary. It was unfortunately for not such great reasons that he had to move there. He was getting cancer treatment, and before I graduated high school, he actually passed away. But my plan of moving to Hungary stuck, and so I did it. I moved. Those of you that don't know me, I'm back in Chicago, but my intention was originally to move and stay in Hungary. But because of family reasons, I ended up coming back to Chicago. And in that time, I met my current husband. So I'm still living in Chicago for now, but I spent a total of 5 years in Hungary. And I am currently completing my bachelor's in clinical psychology. And my bachelor's is also in psychology.
Awesome. Thank you so much. László?
I was born and raised in Chicago and attended Loyola University, got my bachelor's, my master's, and a portion of my doctorate there, which I then paused and stopped when my father became ill. And then came my wife, then came a child, then came another child, then came one more. And then when we moved to Hungary, it was actually because of our daughter who has cerebral palsy. So we made this decision about, well, it's been 4 years for me. A few days ago, actually. It is 22nd. That means it was the 20th of July when I moved here. My family moved here 6 months before I did, just so she can start her treatment here. I wrapped up everything, sold the house, left my job. I was a teacher, and then I was a school principal in the U.S. Then I moved to Hungary with the family. It took a little while until essentially we acclimated. So it took time to actually find out what to do, what we can do. So I've dabbled in real estate for some time. And then I now work by accident. The University of Pannonia found me, which was a happy coincidence. And now I work as a professor of English and American Studies in one department. I work in the teacher training program. So I now essentially help train teachers here in Hungary with the other department. And for whatever reason, I'm going to also be working in the School of Economics in the fall at the University of Pannonia. And I'm still not quite sure why, but Hungarian higher educational system. So, go Pannonia.
Well, thank you for these introductions. As I said, it's really great to have three different perspectives on moving back. But still, I would imagine the process of moving itself is long and tedious. Could you name a top three of the most challenging things that you had to face, when you moved or when you made the decision to moving to Hungary? It could be the length that it took, for the whole process, or the documents, the hardship with like filling out documents, or was it, finding a job or a place to live, adjusting to Hungary, as you mentioned, Laci. Could you all mention, I would say, top three of these, I guess, challenges? And Tímea, if we can start with you this time.
Yeah, so definitely one of my top challenges was the paperwork and documentation. Technically I was an adult, but really I was just barely an adult, 18-year-old. So I didn't know how documentation worked anywhere. But also I got my dual citizenship, so my Hungarian citizenship on top of my American one right before I moved. And it seemed like that was confusing for just a lot of individuals there, what that meant. Because they were saying that you needed what's called a lakcímkártya, which I guess is like your residency card, and they weren't sure why I didn't have a residency card. So there's just a lot of back and forth. There are a lot of different offices and people that weren't sure what to do, and I definitely didn't know what to do. So that's my top challenge of the move. It took me probably a year to get all of my proper documentation done. I was a procrastinator, so that I'm sure prolonged the process. But yeah, that was definitely the top challenge for me. Other challenges, I was by myself. I was a single person that was, lived a pretty bohemian lifestyle. And I had also traveled to Hungary a lot. So that's important, I think, to note that I knew my way around the city. So that wasn't necessarily a difficult thing. But if someone is moving there, and a lot of my friends hadn't spent as much time in Budapest as I had. And so I know that was difficult for them. So I would think that would be a challenge for someone newly moving there. And then just figuring out day-to-day things. How do you get around? Probably, I think, is something that other people struggled with. I went to Balassi Bálint Intézet, which I think some people might know a little bit about, the Balassi Institute. So basically everyone that went to that program was some people that haven't lived in Hungary before. So that's why I know about the experiences of others. So there were people from America and from basically around the world. So everybody had their own challenges with the move, I guess.
Thank you. Laci, how would you compare your challenges to it? Was it also the documents and the length of the process that it took?
I would definitely say the top three are logistics, bureaucracy, and employment. So the logistics on our end was moving a family of 5 at the time. So moving with 3 small children, the household, getting everything here, flying everything over, and essentially finding a house already beforehand. So I've kind of scouted the place out. We decided on just around somewhere in the Balaton region, and we ended up finding a house just before we moved here. So just the logistics of getting here was one thing. Employment, it should be noted that if you haven't lived in Hungary before, and it's more of you've casually visited, or if it's summertime casual visiting Hungary and living here permanently are 2 completely different things. So, you know, that kind of magic wears off rather quickly. So if you're coming here with a company or with employment already ready and they're sponsoring you or God knows what, that makes life easier. If you're not, and if you just move here and you say, I'm going to figure it out when I'm here, I'm sure you will, and you'll figure that out at the Hungarian pace, which, you know, can mean months or years. So that can take time. I myself also did have Hungarian citizenship, but I had mine for quite some time already beforehand. My parents put in our application when we were actually still kids, which actually leads to the third point of bureaucracy, which confused the Hungarians very much because they couldn't quite understand how I was not born here, but I have a Hungarian name and I speak Hungarian very well. And then the question would always come up on, why did you move here? Or why are you here? Why you went in the wrong direction? I'm like, no, I came in the right direction. And it would be answering these questions first before actually filling out paperwork, which, by the way, you don't do every day at a government office, because here in Hungary, Fridays are weekends, technically. You know, people work until noon. And when I mean work, they have coffee until noon. Usually like Tuesday is what we call like a kartonozónap, which is kind of like a filing day. So they don't take in paperwork, they don't work then. And if you ask them, why can't you do 2 things at once? They give you that look like, we're filing. So the bureaucracy of it, everything is slower, and you have to get used to that.
Got it. Thank you so much. Emese, I realize, you know, you moved here, or you moved to Hungary when you were 14. I'm hoping you don't have to battle through the bureaucracy or the lengthy document processing. How would you describe your top challenges that you had to face when you moved to Hungary?
Well, yes, my parents were taking care of the paperwork, and I also know that we applied for citizenship, dual citizenship, before moving here. So we all had our dual citizenship by the time we were moving. For me, the first challenge was getting acclimated in school. I started 8th grade that year, and I had tutors that I would go to that first year so that I could catch up. That was my biggest challenge.
Thank you. So this question will kind of branch off of what previously was said. What would you say the biggest thing that you had to adjust in your day-to-day life? Was it, you know, László, you mentioned the Hungarian lifestyle. Emese, you mentioned, you know, just getting into this different, I would assume it's a different, you know, culture in school. So what was, you know, the adjustments that you had to make in your day-to-day life after moving from the US to Hungary? And let's see if we can start with you.
Okay. Growing up in the United States, but in a Hungarian environment, you learn the language, you learn the culture, But for many of our parents, they came during the time, most of them, it was still during communism. And it's kind of fascinating that Hungarian culture, what they were used to, kind of froze at the period of time when they left. So it's kind of like a microcosm. It's a microculture out in the US, and it's kind of different from what you're going to experience here. That doesn't mean you don't blend in pretty well. I mean, one, we already have Hungarian names, that helps. You kind of blend in pretty quickly. You speak the language, you know a general idea, but depending on where you're going to land, yeah, like dealing with the bureaucracy, dealing with work ethic, which can be kind of lax. And I'm like, yeah, we'll get it done when it gets done. You know, or, don't worry about it. Or the response to the email happens a week later, and people don't quite understand why you're so upset if there was a deadline. But also Hungarian culture in itself, depending on where you move. We move to a rural area. We've now finally settled in a place called Bokoinbél, which is just north of Veszprém in the Bokoin Mountains. It's great. We're near city centers, about 20 minutes away, which here seems like a long drive. Chicago, that's actually a really short drive in traffic. But it's a rural area. So there are going to be Hungarian traditions that they will involve you in. Sometimes it may seem strange, new, exciting. So I could give you an example. Two years ago, during the fall, apparently a group of people who were just being friendly, a group of men, arrived at our house. This was, I would say, late September, and they decided that they were going to take me to Szarvasbőgés, stag, bőgés, making noises essentially when they're mating. Okay. Now, you explain this to an American in English, and forgive me if any of this will sound crude, because it's 2 in.the morning, and I'm just going to say it as it is. I was confused, and my wife was laughing at me. She goes, "Oh, I think you really should go," while she's laughing. I said, "Well, I don't know what this is, but sure, why not?" So I ended up going deep into the woods at night, wearing a blanket with a bunch of dudes with alcohol to listen to horny animals yelling at each other in the dark. And, you know, you're sitting there going, all right, this is weird. You know, I'm pretty sure if we replaced the animals part with humans, this would be considered a felony in the US to be listening to this. And, you know, it came back at 2 in.the morning, and then my wife is kind of smirking and laughing at me going, "So how was it?" I said, "Well, you know, I'm really confused right now. So I'm going to go to sleep, and I'm going to try to figure out what the hell just happened tomorrow morning." Never really got any more answers, but apparently that's a thing in this area. And again, not something that you prepare for in the US. We don't do this in Chicago. We don't drive out to neighborhoods at 2 in.the morning, wear blankets with a bunch of dudes and watch animals mating. You know, you would get shot. So that was an adjustment. So getting used to what local customs are in culture, kind of different.
Thank you. Emese, what would you say were your biggest adjustments that you had to do in your day-to-day life?
Well, the biggest adjustment, as I said previously, was getting used to the school system. Here, we don't just take tests. There's something called felelés, which is like an oral accounting of your knowledge. So you have to go home and learn the I don't know, lesson or chapter from your book after each lesson. And then the next lesson, the teacher goes through the class roster, and picks out 1, 2, 3 people to recap last lesson's material. And then that was interesting, getting to know that. And also math was interesting because they do it totally differently here. So for a while, I was placed in the because I don't know how they do, I don't remember how it's done in the States, but here, like, they take your class and then cut it in half based on your performance. And then I was actually put into the lesser group because I was having trouble with the math. And then eventually when they realized that I know math just differently, then I was eventually transferred to the more advanced group. So that was an interesting thing to compare. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, certainly a different school system will be quite hard to adjust. Tímea, what would you say your biggest adjustment that you had to make?
It was really hard for me to think of. I was really happy to be there, despite the fact that I know that, and Emese remembers because Emese and I grew up together in Chicago, and then we actually spent a lot of time in Hungary together as well. And I was thrilled to be there. So it was hard for me to think of something bad because I was just so happy. Like, I had my freedom. I was 18. I was like, I could go to the bar, like, and it's legal here, and that's amazing. And yeah, so I was just really excited. But I think, yeah, what Emese was saying about the school situation, that was difficult to acclimate to for me as well. Even though the program that I was in was for people that weren't born and raised in Hungary, we still went through the similar situations because they didn't necessarily change exactly how schooling was done there. And I remember, like, oral test taking, I was like, what do you mean I have to present my, what I learned in speech? Like, I don't even know how to process that way because I'm not used to it. But to say something different, I guess, something kind of funny, I guess, to add to this is when I was filling out official paperwork and they'd send it back and they said, if it's not in blue ink, it's not official. And I was like, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard of. What do you mean? So that was probably, yeah, just to keep it light. But also, could I comment to László's story?
Absolutely.
Please.
So I think that, I mean, again, for those that don't know us, like, so I was living in Budapest, which is a city. László's experience don't seem like very Budapest city type. I don't know if that would even happen in a city situation. It might,
not.
But I guess there's not necessarily wild animals in the middle, in the middle of a city situation. So obviously it also, I think, depends on where people were living. And I'm sure there are challenges also have to pertain to what life situation we were in. So I just wanted to add that bit.
Absolutely. Yes, thank you. So moving along, moving this topic to a little bit of different direction, and that is job finding. In the US, there's certainly a various amount of different resources that you can use to find and apply for jobs. It could be Indeed or LinkedIn, or just through networking. How did you look for a job, and how did you find a job? And also, what would you suggest for someone who's planning on moving from the US to Hungary to go about finding a job? And we can start with Emese.
LinkedIn is catching on, and there are other Hungarian-based websites that are similar to LinkedIn. They're not really like social sites. They're more just like job sites, like where there are jobs listed, and then you can enter your parameters of what you're looking for, what type of job, what field, how much experience, whatever, and then they optimize the search engine for you. So that's a way to look for jobs. And yeah, I guess networking is, I mean, it's important, but not in the sense of like, I'm actively networking and then as an unknown, I network my way into a job. It's more about who you already know and if they know of any job openings at their current place of work. So finding a job is quite tedious and hard. And right now I'm actually out of work. So, and I've been out of work for like 10 months. And it's just like, if you're in the wrong field, and me with my background in humanities am seeming to be in the wrong field, because it's IT jobs and financial jobs and things like that, that are more available. And also, as Tímea said, it really depends on the situation. I live in Pécs currently, which is like 2 to 3 hours south of Budapest, which means there aren't that many jobs here. Like my friend who lives in Budapest, she's telling me, like, if I go there, then I would definitely find a job in less time, because there are just so many more opportunities. And unfortunately, the salaries also reflect that. So like, if I would get the same job in both cities, I would get paid more in Budapest for it. Yeah.
Thank you. Tímea?
So I had a series of different types of jobs. So I had like a waitressing job, 2 waitressing type jobs. I worked at a school with special needs kids. And I also worked at a daycare center in the time that I was in Magyarország, or in Hungary. And I mean, so a couple of them I got through knowing a professor, both the one at the school and the daycare center. So yeah, it certainly helped. Like once you're in a field, like I'm just saying, that like if you're, if you know the right types of people to get you into a job. I mean, I didn't really have, there was no interview process. It was just like, I got in because they knew my professor and they were like, you're hired. And I was like, okay, thank you. So, I mean, also, I think that, and this, I know this wasn't the question necessarily, but I remember that thinking back on this experience, it was difficult for me to fathom, and this would be the same thing in the US, I'm assuming, that one of my job as a salad and shake maker girl paid basically twice as much as my job in a school did. So it's really unfortunate that you'd want to do a job where you're feeling like you're doing something more, which, I certainly was, but I was traveling for 3 hours there and back, to get to the school and to make just a fraction of what I would throwing lettuce in a bowl. I mean, once you need to, pay rent, it was kind of a paycheck to paycheck situation. So interesting experiences. Again, I don't know what it would be like now that I'm older. But yeah, definitely knowing the right people was helpful, and I would imagine that it still is. So networking is important everywhere, I think.
Wonderful, thank you. László?
Very much the same thing on, you have to know people. And if you are going to move here, it would be really advantageous if you already have your job in hand ready to go. So if you're coming in with a corporation or you already have an agreement with where you're going to be working, it makes life a lot easier. I can draw this comparison with a close childhood friend of mine who almost moved identically at the same time. That's a Nádas. So when he moved here, he already had his job in place, and that helped with the transition. And I didn't do that, and that took time. So here you also need to have, aside from all the other documentation, Lakcímkártya is kind of like the holy grail along with your SEMI, but you also have to have your Tajkártya, which is kind of like the public healthcare system number card. Now, obtaining that, if you haven't lived here or you weren't born here, is kind of a catch-22. Because they will say, well, you can get your Tajkártya when you submit your contract that you have a job. A job will say, well, we'll give you a contract as soon as you show us what your Taj number. Okay, so clearly there's a disconnect. How do we go about fixing this? And that process of getting the Tajkártya actually took about, let's say, a good 1.5 years for me because of bureaucracy, paperwork. At one point, we filled out the wrong paperwork because somebody couldn't understand the fact that Chicago wasn't a village in Hungary and that it was in the United States. And they were frustrated and said, we have to start all over again. We filled out the wrong paperwork. And So it was all networking. That real estate job was just to get by. I got lucky that I was even able to fall into that. But that kind of gave me tools to get used to other things here living in Hungary as well, and also learning about local construction. And when working at the university was literally just finding the right person at the right time. They said, my God, what's your background? That's fantastic. Could you please come in? I came in, I had a talk with the dean. I thought that was a talk. And then afterwards they said, fantastic, you're hired. Didn't realize it was a job interview. And I said, oh, well, that sounds really exciting. What do I do now? And they said, well, you're going to go over to HR and fill out paperwork, and you start next week. So have your course materials ready and everything. And again, it was just finding the right people at the right time, networking. And you also cannot rely on the fact that if you see a job opening online, that doesn't mean it's actually a job opening. Most of the time it's just legally required to open the position and advertise for an interview. But in the end, what ends up happening is they know exactly who they're going to hire. It's just a formality. But many times they won't tell you this. So it's just easier to just ask, excuse me, is this already designated for somebody, or am I, actually an interview? And they'll tell you basically, well, actually, we already know who we're going to hire. Okay, thank you. It's just practical.
Awesome. Well, at least they are open about it and tell you if they are hiring or not. What are some of the benefits that you think you experienced of moving back to Hungary or spending time in Hungary, as opposed to the life in the US? And we can start with László.
I would say pace of life. It is slower. And especially if you're moving here with a family, I have to admit that it's a lot easier in the sense of time and just the way that you can budget your time with your family here. That has been very very advantageous. They are right now with the local government in place. There's a lot of things that are negatives as well, but one thing that they do kind of emphasize if you do have a family is they give a whole bunch of benefits and tax credits if you have children. So if you do have kids, that helps greatly, especially because of the salary differentials between the US and Hungary and just Budapest and various parts of the rest of the country. But the pace of lifestyle is definitely important, and that I experienced on my own children. My oldest, Maki, who, when I told him here that, Dad found a job and he's going to start working, he started to cry. And I said, why are you crying? And he said, well, if you're working, that means I won't see you again. And that's when it kind of hit me that in the US, it was just this pace of life of work meant work was your life. It took over every aspect. It was long hours, it was weekends. And his idea of an adult, your parents working was, I'm not going to really see you that often. Whereas here, it's Hungary. Friday is, come home early day, not in every single field, but in many different areas. Or the weekends are kind of kept as sacred if that's the type of job that you have. Here, if you do go on vacation, you're on vacation. Don't bother me. I'm not going to answer any of your calls. It doesn't matter if it's a national emergency. Fun story, if you're keeping up with the news, you'll understand why that is a joke. There's a spying scandal, and the response right now currently was, I'm sorry, we can't investigate because I'm on vacation. Can we do this in 2 weeks? So that's the pace of life here. It's very different.
Tímea, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah. So again, I'm trying to go back to my 18-year-old self. So this is a while ago for me, but I loved the fact that they weren't like, how do you say your name? Is it Kimmy? Is it Tammy? And I was like, my name is my name, and everyone got it and knew it, and there's no question about it. And after 18 years of suffering through that was amazing. But also I felt really connected. It was a decision that I made to move there. And like I said before, I was just really excited to be there. I guess mostly, and what, like for me, my family talked about it like moving home, and that's how I talked about it too. It was home, even though I never lived there before that point. But I did feel like I did move home, and I did feel like it was a very positive step that I didn't regret at any point. And I just felt connected, I guess, to my roots. So none of my family, even though most of them live here now, they all were born and raised in Hungary. So I felt like just more connected to my roots. And I don't know, like the commute that I was talking about, the 3-hour commute to work, like most of the time it was a joy, at least going to work. On the way home, I was kind of like, I'm done with public transportation. But anyway, I just felt really connected and just happy in my everyday life, I guess.
Got it. Thank you. Emese, looking back, what would you say are the benefits of, moving back to Hungary? Especially maybe, we could reflect on a perspective of, a kid who is 14 years old.
Well, benefits, it's very, like László said, it's a different paced life, and it's slower paced than even Pécs, which is, I think, like the 5th largest city in Hungary or something like that. Public transportation is very good in cities, and even like going into rural settings, they still have bus routes. Like most of the villages are privileged enough to have normal bus schedules if they're close by to some kind of bigger city. Of course, there are those villages that are kind of totally cut off, and there's maybe 2 bus routes per day. So it's not ideal for everywhere. But other than that, public transportation is very good. And also, I know Tímea agrees with this, that it's very walkable. Like you can walk from place to place here in Pécs, in the city center especially, but Budapest as well. It's, interestingly enough, it's quite walkable. So that's what I think is one of the benefits. It's you get out more and not just like hopping in and out of your car.
Absolutely, yes. My field is transportation planning, and in our field, we always try to strive towards that European lifestyle and that European public transit system. Which brings me to the next question. And looking at the time, I know we mentioned having you guys here for about 45 minutes. So I only have 2 questions left. The first one is, moving back, do you need a car? Or how much would you say, do you need saved up to effectively move back and live a full life where you can work and, just like live, I guess, a full life. And, I leave it up to you if any of you want to start.
Yeah, I'll actually take that one just because, Emese was referring to me. That was one of the things when I moved back to the US. It was a bigger culture shock for me to move to suburbia in the US than from Chicago to Budapest. And that's probably because I didn't think about the fact that to move, from where I am now to the closest store, which was less than 5 minutes away, I had to get in my vehicle, which I didn't have at the time. So, in terms of in Hungary, I think it completely depends on where you live. If you're inner city, I would say that it's almost more of a hassle to have a car a lot of the times, especially if you're a single person. If you have lots of little children, it might be a different story, but in terms of parking and traffic and driving, having a car is definitely a difficult situation to maintain, I think. But again, if you're more in rural areas, then I'm sure that it has its benefits as it would anywhere else, I think. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, to piggyback off of that, I would say, yes, if you're in an urban area, it is a blessing here that, the public transportation systems are pretty well thought out. Rural areas, as Emese mentioned, there's bus routes. Bus routes still connect a lot of rural areas, and if you're near a train route as well, The train system is really, the rail system is really good as well. But again, depending on your life situation. So if you're single, you may not feel it necessary. Coming with a family, yeah, especially living in a rural area, yeah, you need a car. You definitely need a car. The best way that I would say it is, if you're in a rural area, consider that the suburbs in the US. You need a car to get around. You also need to be prepared for the fact that the way that people drive here is a little different. You know, roads are slightly more narrower here than they are in the US. So when you see that guy zoom by really quickly in the opposite lane and it almost takes off your mirror, that's normal, you know, as well as the aggressiveness of the driving, you know, and I don't necessarily mean that in a positive way. It's usually just, I'm in a hurry to get somewhere, or I'd like to flex my, you know, car, overcompensate and try to get in front of the next person to win 2 minutes in traffic. So that's necessary. But to answer your question about how much you need saved up, you know, again, that really depends on where your life situation is at the time. I would recommend that if you are going to come here, have at least some sort of bankroll ready to go, just to help yourself get established. We went through the home buying process here three times already in 4 years, and I really don't want to do this again. But it should be noted that interest rates are a lot lower when it comes to loans. A lot of the things that exist in the US when it comes to applying for home loans don't exist here, points and whatnot. So when we looked at an equivalent of a mortgage here as opposed to the US, it was several $100 less. I mean, I would say at least 30 to 40% less, which was kind of surprising, and not because of the amount of the loan taken, but because, or the mortgage taken, but because of so many of the bureaucratic points and taxes that didn't exist in the lower interest rates. So it's great to take advantage of that, but definitely come with, as they recommend when you're unemployed in the US, you know, have at least like a 6 month to a year war chest ready to go, and that helps.
Emese, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I concur.
Awesome. And that brings us to our last questions, which is, you know, what would you recommend for those Hungarians who are thinking about making the move and moving back to Hungary? You know, if you could name, I would say top 3, and it could be like, you know, in any of the fields, like in the professional, or Hungarians who are looking forward to, you know, move back for school, etc. And Emese?
Well, if you're moving back for school, then it really depends on whether or not you're a citizen and what kind of input you can give to the system, because I'm not sure how the higher education thing works if you're not a citizen, because I was a citizen and I completed high school here. It was very easy for me to apply to college or university, as we call them here. And I was able to take a scholarship, or államilag támogatott képzés, which means that basically the government pays for your schooling. I'm not sure how if non-citizens are eligible. I'm pretty sure not, because the way it works is that with every degree or major, there's 2 types of funding. There's the state-funded version, and then there's the self-funded version, which still is lots and lots and lots cheaper as compared to America or other parts of the world. So definitely that's something to look into, to get the story straight of who's eligible or who's not. I know that the current government has scholarships for foreigners. So that's something to look into.
Got it. Thank you. Tímea?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, I thought about a couple different things, but I'll just start with the last thing Emese said. Scholarships is definitely a good place to start. I know that they have a whole bunch of different kinds of different programs that existed back when I was 18, like I said, the Balashi program. I think that's still working. I mean, that's a starting off point, and at least that way, young people that are going there, you don't necessarily have to start a 4-year, college degree if you're not sure that you want to stay there for that long. So just saying that you're going to try a 9-month program might be the right way to start. And then there's definitely other types of programs as well. My stepson actually applied for one of them just a couple months ago. He just turned 18. And that's for a 4-year and even master's program scholarship. So I would suggest go online. Anyone that wants to, go into any type of higher education system in Hungary to go online and see what's out there in terms of programs and scholarships. And then also a little bit more about my experience is that I wasn't really intending to go to college necessarily other than the Balashi program when I first moved there. But once I changed my mind, they weren't really sure how to handle the fact that my high school education was in the US. And they were like, well, you should take the high school exam. And I was like, no, I've already gone through high school. I don't want to take a high school exam. So there was definitely a lot of interesting bits there, but I know that I know a lot of people that did manage to make it work. So it's possible to figure it out, get lucky, ask the right questions. I'm sure there's people that had a better experience in that than I did. But I think lastly, just if people do want to go to college in another country, whether that be Magyarország or Hungary or anywhere else, just make sure that you know what program you're doing. And then once you move back to the country that you came from, that they will accept it and the transferability works out. That's also really important because I did higher education in Hungary as well. And it wasn't accepted as college credits in the US, which was really unfortunate. I've been in college for like longer than I've been in primary school almost. So, but it was a fun journey, I guess. So do a lot of research, in short, is what I would say.
Those are some really good points. Thank you so much. And then László, wrapping this up, if you could just, have your insight on it, and we could probably focus on, the more professional or like the, older life out of college, moving to Hungary.
Okay. Older life, thank you. No, but that's true because I spent 37 years in the U.S. That's where I was born and raised. So I was 37 when I moved here, just shy of a few months of 37. Chicago is always going to be home for me. I'm always going to be, I'm always going to be an American and Hungarian by the way I was raised. But you have to get used to this fact where sometimes people will make you feel like you don't necessarily, have a home. Oh, you're Hungarian, that's nice. You have a Hungarian name, but you're really not Hungarian. Okay. And then you kind of get that from the U.S. every now and then. You don't live in the U.S. anymore. You're technically, how American are you? So you kind of feel a little stateless. Going back just very quickly when it comes to colleges and universities here. So put my name on the list if anybody ever has questions about that. Working at a university, I'd be happy to help with that. Hungarian universities, universities right now are in this big competition to really show the world that, yes, see, international students do want to come here. So there are scholarships out there, the Stipendium Hungaricum, really creative name, by the way, is available for foreign students. So even at our university, we usually have a lot of foreign students on the Stipendium Hungaricum, which is kind of neat. And yes, as Tímea mentioned, do your homework ahead of time. Check to see if it's accredited, if it's accepted in the United States or not, if you are planning on moving back or if you want to continue your studies somewhere else. Contact the dean of the department where you want to learn. They will bend over backwards really to try to get you information. And even if you need funding help or scholarship help, they will connect you and put you in the right position. And for the decision itself, for moving here, I think that's really, it's just a personal thing for everybody. It's a case-by-case basis. Some people may regret it. Some people may think it's the best decision of their life. Some people may think that, you know, this is just a temporary thing and we'll reevaluate 5 years from now. So it's really case-by-case basis. For us, we had our reasons for medical reasons. We know we're in it for the long haul, for at least a good 10, 15 years. But I don't necessarily regret it. It's a transition. There are things that you have to trade off and accept here, whether it's the government or whether it's another important thing I think that everybody needs to be clear with, healthcare. Hospitals here are very different. And when I mean different, I mean bring your own food, bring your own sheets many times. Care isn't necessarily always the best. Doctors do their best to try to make do with what they have, but it's different, and you do have to get ready for that. We've already been, well, our fourth child was born here a few months ago, so that was different. They were very professional, but the environment, the buildings are kind of in disarray. They're short-staffed, supplies are limited, so you have to be prepared for that. There's a long ways to go here when it comes to healthcare still.
Thank you. That's a really good point. And I do want to respect your time, László and Emese, especially considering that it's almost 3 a.m. But if you're open and if we have any questions from the participants, we might open the floor if you're okay with that.
I'm drinking coffee, so go right ahead.
Okay, so if we have any questions from the attendees, you can either send it in the chat or just raise your hand and we can unmute you and you can ask your question if you'd like to. Okay, looks like Robert.
Yeah, thanks. I have one question regarding the US double taxation. So do you have any problem with that? Because you are a dual citizen and you need to pay something, and how much, and you need to track it or something. So I'm super curious. Thank you.
I'll jump in on that one. First of all, hi, Roby.
Hey,
good to see you. Good to see you again. Congratulations on your child.
Thank you.
And when it comes to taxation, so right now the way that this works is the law states, the US IRS says the following. If you are the resident of a foreign country and you're a US citizen, if you make less than, I believe, what the threshold is of $105,000 equivalent, and you pay taxes here in Hungary, that is not taxable in the US. Once you make past that, they start counting that amount and that's what they start taxing. So considering that this is Hungary and you're probably not going to find too many positions in which they're paying that much, you should be fine. But you do need to file your taxes every year. Do make it very clear. And if it's anything that deals with slightly more complicated things, so you do have investments, stocks, bonds, options, or you do have real estate in the US still, it's probably good to do it with a service or professional first, at least your first year and second year, just to make sure that you're filling out the correct paperwork because you are technically residing in another country. But for the way that we do it is we have our foreign residents here, but we keep a US address, which is actually acceptable. So basically all correspondence goes to the US address, but at the same time, they understand we live here in a foreign country. That actually makes life easier than them trying to send correspondence here, which they tried and it never arrived. So that's the last thing you want with the IRS is not good communication.
Okay, Emese or Timmy, you guys have anything to add?
No, I was just trying. No, I don't. I wouldn't know what the first thing to say in that is. So I'm glad Lexi took that one for all of us.
Awesome. Do we have any more questions?
I mean, I guess I had one. I mean, relating to what Lexi was talking about, healthcare. You know, Hungary is known for medical tourism, right? Is it just because that quality of care is just not affordable and like most Hungarian salaries, or okay?
Yeah. So there's some medical tourism, but I think it's more specific. So dental tourism is huge in Hungary. For example, Moson-Magyaróvár, which is on the close to the Austrian border, has the most dentists per capita, I believe, in God knows, like Hungary or possibly in Europe. So dental care, if you could afford it, is pretty top notch, I have to admit. Some other types of medical tourism, more for cost reasons, as you mentioned. So either the wait list is way too long in a European country, or the quality is high as long as you can afford it. So there are private clinics here, outside of what you pay in your TOI, so your national health care. If you would like to spend an extra 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 forint, you can kind of skip the line, go to a clinic. That same doctor that's working at that hospital also works at a clinic, and then you kind of skip the line and get in ahead of time. That's really the way to go, especially if you have something that's a little bit more pressing. So, the clinics are night and day from what the state hospitals are. The clinics are really nice and it's very professional, and nobody is actually smoking on premises.
Okay, so let's see. We did have the two questions that we said we're gonna have from the audience. And I guess with that, we can close.
There's another question.
Oh, there is?
Yeah, I have.
Okay.
Sorry. I don't want to dig deeper with the politics, but, you know, sometimes it's a little bit uncomfortable, let's say that, if somebody is just mentioned that, yeah, I know what is going on in Hungary in several cases. So I don't want to dig deeper with that, but how do you handle that as a, let's say that as an American, if you are facing these such a very different and very strange things, what is going on? And Lotzi, you just mentioned that what is going on right now, and it's tough if you are American, I guess.
It's frustrating, very much so. So one general truth in the world is it's very rare that you're going to find a country where you don't have at least some level of corruption. But you know, not to dump on my host country right now, but yeah, it's almost like a national sport here. So it's frustrating to watch. And you kind of have to compartmentalize. So there are some things that you can be active and do something about it here. You know, fight the power, so to speak. You know, in certain ways, but in other ways, you also have to kind of look at and say, all right, well, while looking at that, you also at the same time have to see what benefits you get, and like what you just need to do to take care of your own family and your own self at the same time. Case in point, working at a university right now, we're going through a major transition here, where many universities are becoming privatized. And we're currently going through that process right now. So I'm supposed to be getting our new contract sometime within the next few days. And many promises have been made. Nothing has been put into writing yet, and we have until August 1st to sign the contracts. So it would be really nice to see the draft of the contract sometime soon. but you kind of make your change known however you can. Case in point, working with teacher trainees, there was a big overhaul in the national educational system here, and it became very centralized through the NOT, Nemzeti Alaptanterv. Hasn't technically been the most positive thing, and coming from an educational background and working in administration as well, I read through the NOT and it was very confusing because I can see that not a lot of professional educators were involved in the process of writing this curriculum. What do? What you can do is do what you can. So what we do, working in the teacher education department, we basically tell the students, here are the things that we technically have to tell you and you technically have to know. On the other side, here are many methodologies that we use in the United States. Here's the way that we do this, here's that. We give them all the tools necessary, work on a lot of critical thinking, Bloom's taxonomy, and just get them open to that point. So you kind of have to make your change available where you can do it within your own realm. But it's compartmentalization. That's really the best advice I can give.
Emese or Tímea, insights?
No, I'm going to go ahead and say thanks, László, for taking all the hard ones.
Awesome. So in that case, if there's no absolute last minute questions, we can close it off. Emese, Tímea, László, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for taking time to meet. It was a great meeting. I really enjoyed, learning about your experiences, also about the tips. So again, thank you so much. And then folks who have joined us, if it's your first time here, welcome. There's a form in the chat that's coming around. If you could please fill it out, it would help us a lot to understand how this went, what went good, what went wrong. And there's also a link to our LinkedIn group where we host our main communication channel. We also post the upcoming events. And if you would like to get involved with HYP, Hungarian Young Professionals, please do reach out to us. Our email address is hyp@mail.com or hyp@usa.com. Both work. Thank you again for coming here, and hope to see you all soon.